there are 4 words that are being said here. One is that the wali in charge of giving them this portion should say, take hold of what I'm giving you. Barakallahu feek. May Allah bless you. As narrated by Salim al-Aftas from Ibn Jubayr. The guardian over the wealth also says that it is wealth of the orphans. And what do I have to do with any of this? Let it be divided. And this was stated by Abu Bishr from Ibn Jubayr. And in another narration from Sa'id ibn Jubayr, he said, if the dead has been advised that if the dead has left behind some bequest for them at all, that bequest should be given to them. Even if the inheritors are of an adult age, it still needs to be turned over to them. And if they are young, these people who are receiving bequests are young, then the wali over the inheritance should say, this is not yet your wealth to take. Go back. As for the inheritors among you, this is not your wealth. This is a bequest that has been given to the young. And that is the goodly word. Thirdly, it is the proper dividing of the wealth. So the one who's in charge of dividing the wealth says to the guardians of the inheritors, indeed, these inheritors we have among us today, there are some who are small. When they reach the age of distinction, I command you to know their rights and give them their rights. As said by Ata ibn Dinar from Ibn Jubayr. Fourthly, is that they're given of the wealth, and it's said to them at the time of the division of the wealth, whether it's land or other properties, Allah give you blessings. And this is the goodly word. This is the statement of Al-Hasan al-Basri and Ibrahim al-Nakhai. We used to know the people who would do this when they divided the wealth. Now, the question on everyone's mind that will read this is this ayah, according to the scholars of abrogation and abrogating? The scholars differ in this. Some say that the ayah is muhkama, and is the statement of Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, Ibn Abbas, Al-Hasan al-Basri, Abu al-Aliya, Al-Sha'bi, Ata ibn Abi Rabah, Sa'id ibn Jubayr, Mujahid, Ibrahim al-Nakhai, Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri. And they have said that this is a statement that is muhkam. The vast majority hold that what is being said in this ayah with regards to giving the near relatives a portion is praiseworthy, but some of them say it's wajib. The second ruling is that this ayah was abrogated by the next statement when Allah says, Yusikumullahu fi awladikum. Allah admonishes you and advises you regarding your children. Now this was narrated from Mujahid from Ibn Abbas. It is also the understanding of Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib, Ikrimah, Ad-Dahhak, and Qatada ibn Da'ima. Close quote. Now here's what the Shaykh is saying. What Imam Al-Jawzi rahimahullah is saying is this, in this ayah when you read it, that when the near relatives and orphans and the poor people come, then give them some sustenance from it and say to them a goodly word. This is what it means. When you've divided up the inheritance, you've paid the debts, you've given the bequests, because those are the first things you do. Now there's a difference between the bequests and the inheritance. The bequest is usually given to those who cannot inherit. Whether it's friends of the family, whether it's very distant cousins, they're given bequests. And that can be whatever the holder of the will and testament has determined. debts have to be paid simply because if the debts do not get paid, the creditors may move in and try to seize the wealth of the inheritors or the bequest of those who are to receive it. And that's not right. So the debts must be paid first by what Allah has said. Now the inheritance, that goes to people who are clearly denoted as being inheritors. So for example, Allah says that the parents get this, the daughter gets this, the son gets this. Now, there is a difference of opinion based upon these ayat between the ulama. The Basrans, i.e. the people of Ahmad ibn Hanbal's school, they say that the grandmother inherits. The grandmother inherits. But Ibn Abbas and the others, the Shafi'is, say, no, the grandmother doesn't inherit. The Jiddah, or the Jeddah, in proper Arabic. She doesn't inherit. And so because of that, you will view the ayah slightly different. So some of the Shafi'is may view this ayah that when the division is done, give some of it to the near relatives. They would class some of them, the grandmother, the Jeddah, as a near relative. Then you have the orphans and the poor. They would give that. They'd say, well, she doesn't inherit. Now that's a serious thing if you're a grandmother. And you would receive either a sixth or an eighth, depending upon the ruling. That's a serious thing when you're told, no, just give them a portion. Well, you could wind up getting nothing. You could wind up getting a significantly smaller amount versus if you had the other position and you said, no, it's going to be a sixth or an eighth. Because that's a predetermined portion that cannot be taken away. But if you're just told in the ayah, give them something, well, that could be whatever they have to give you. And that's a difference. And this is a constant dispute. So if you're in a situation where, say, it's inheritance law in Egypt, or inheritance law in Malaysia, or Indonesia, they are Shafi'is. So there could be some dispute regarding the grandmother inheriting. But in the Gulf, in northern Syria, those areas, the Gulf, which is all of Arabia, what there's misnomer of calling it Saudi, but it's all of Arabia, all of the Gulf with the exception of Yemen, because Yemen, they are Shafi'is, that whole area, grandmothers inherit. Grandmothers inherit. And so the rulings are going to affect what happens. Further to this, say to them goodly words. This particular ayah is also showing us that cousins as well can be included among the near relatives. Cousins. These are people, this ayah, ulul qurba, can embrace anyone who does not fall under and has not been specifically stipulated as an inheritor. So whoever Allah in His book and in His sunnah has not stipulated as an inheritor, they could fall under the classification of ulul qurba. I'm simplifying it a little bit because there is some dispute when we talk about, do hermaphrodites inherit? People who have both sets of genitals do. People inherit from cousins of people. But I'm just trying to keep it as simple as possible. Those that haven't specifically been stipulated in the book of Allah and the sunnah of His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, those specifically not stipulated would be in one case classed as ulul qurba or ulul arham in a specific sense. Now the Imam rahimahullah, he then says, quote, and when the Exalted One has said to you, and those who are guardians over the orphans, let them fear and remember if they were to leave behind weak and lowly offspring, how concerned they would have felt. They should fear Allah and speak only that which is right. Now this particular statement is one that needs to be considered. Let those who have left behind fear what could happen. Now, who is being addressed in this particular ayah? There's three types of people being addressed in this ayah. One is it speaking to those who are present at the time of the division of the wealth and the bequests that are being handed out. And now this is encompassing also, firstly, that those who are present fear that they might leave behind some bequests in the wealth. And what could happen is by leaving behind bequests, those given the gifts could wind up arguing and fighting. And then what will happen is those who get the gifts may oppress and then steal the wealth of the inheritors. So care must be exercised. Those carrying out the division of the inheritance must make sure that they fulfill their duties. So, in secret and in public, they hasten and insist on preserving the wealth for the children. And this is the very purpose and point of the executor. As has been narrated from Ibn Abbas, Al-Hassan, Sa'id ibn Jubair, Mujahid, Qatada, Al-Dhahhak, Al-Sudai, Muqatil. Secondly, is that those present have been forbidden from stopping the near relatives from coming for their portion in the bequests that they've been given. They've been told not to do this. And this is part of what this ayah advises. The ayah is also talking to those in charge of guarding the wealth of the orphans. Because Allah says, and you're not to eat of the wealth in waste and with wickedness. Meaning, keep hold of the wealth of the orphans. Do not over-exaggerate and take wealth that's not yours. Look after the affairs as guardians of your children. After your time, you'll need guardians to look after the affairs. It's also talking to those who have left behind bequests, making sure that they leave behind bequests in clear language, and that no one is left misunderstanding that which has been left, so that way no one can change that which has been left. Remember the statement as well that abrogates part of the previous ayah. Whoever fears, فَمَنْ خَافَ مِن مُوسٍ جَنَفًا أَوْ إِثْمًا فَأَصْلَحَ بَيْنَهُمْ فَلَا إِثْمَ عَلَيْهِ. Whoever feared from the executor some type of tribulation or sin, then let them make some type of agreement between them, so there's no sin upon them. Surah Al-Baqarah, the second surah, ayah 182. Now, the command with the bequests in this ayah is when someone finds that they may incline away from the truth, they must head straight back to the Sharia. And they must do justice between the inheritors, as mentioned by our Sheikh Ali ibn Ubaidullah. Ali ibn Ubaidullah, our Sheikh, mentioned this in his book, An-Nasikh wal-Mansukh. And he held the position that this ayah was abrogated by other ayat. Others hold the position that's a muhkama. But the main point that you need to remember is the fact that Allah used the word di'af. This is the plural of the word da'if. And those da'if mentioned in that ayah are the small children. For they can do nothing of themselves. So they must be protected. And you must fear what could happen and what could come about with regard to them. Those who eat the wealth of the orphans in oppression. This ayah was sent down because of two incidents that happened. There was a man from the Ghatafan tribe whose name was Murthid ibn Zayd. And he was put in charge of the wealth of the son of his brother, his nephew. But he took the wealth and appropriated it for himself. So this ayah was sent down regarding this matter. Secondly, there was also an incident in which Hanzala ibn Shamradal, he was put in charge of an orphan, and he appropriated the orphan's wealth. And when he did that, this ayah was sent down. Now, the only reason this word eating, akala, is being used in this ayah, the scholars of commentary say, Allah used the word akala in this ayah because it's showing the intent of the person that's taking the wealth. Meaning that they're eating it, they're consuming it, they're devouring it, and leaving nothing left. It actually, in this sense, akala in this ayah means to take, but the fact that it's being used is to drive home the point that the person is devouring the wealth, just as one would eat food. And the oppression here, oppression, dhulm, means to take something without right. And when Allah says that they will swallow into their bellies fire, it's an ayah of emphasis. Just like when someone says, I looked at it with my very own eyes, or I heard it with my very own ears. And when Allah says that they're eating fire, it's referring to two things. One is that they will be eating fire because they took this wealth on the day of resurrection. Don't you remember the ayah? أَعْصِرُوا خَمْرًا, that the squeezing of the wine, Surah Yusuf, the 12th Surah, Ayat 36, sometimes Allah uses expressions to refer to hereafter events. As Sudai had said, the one who eats the wealth of the orphan in oppression shall be lapped up by the fire. And this fire will consume that person's hearing, their ears, their nose, their eyes, all of that which he used to eat the wealth. Now, secondly, what this ayah is referring to in the terms, in the point of saying eating fire, it is also a metaphor. They're eating that which is going to lead them to the fire. Don't you remember the statement where Allah said, وَلَقَدْ كُنْتُمْ تَمَنَّوْنَ الْمَوْتَ مِنْ قَبْلِ أَنْ تَلْقَوْهُ فَقَدْ رَأَيْتُمُوهُ. Already, you were hoping for death before that time. And then you met the enemy and you saw death in front of you. Surah Al-Imran, the 3rd Surah, Ayah 143. Now, obviously, this is not referring to death in a form, but it means that you saw the causes of what could lead to death. For this is a metaphor. And then Allah had said, and they shall be burned in the fire. Now, this word, sayaslawna, what it means is that they shall be scorched in the fire. Their skin shall be disfigured, and their person shall be distorted beyond recognition in the blazing fire. In thinking about this, some people, when they look at these ayat, have no knowledge of tafsir or fiqh. And they mistakenly think that even the hereafter punishments in this ayah are abrogated. Because they've heard that it was sent down, and they have also misread the verses on the orphans regarding the mixing of the wealth of the orphans with their wealth. But the ayah regarding the mixing of the orphans' wealth with your own wealth, mentioned in Surah Al-Baqarah, the 2nd Surah, Ayat 220, is not a command, nor is it a license to do oppression. It is stating the reality of something in case it happens. Fear Allah and do not corrupt in this regard. When the Exalted One says, He, Allah, admonishes you in your children, or regarding your children,